To begin with, we're going to look back in the days of old, back in the 1980s, the dark ages of computer. This was back when they had the PC XTs and the ATs, the 286s, the 386s, and the 486s. Windows was unheard of yet. Linux, not so much. Mac, a little bit, but not so much. Most of the PC stuff was done on early single processor computers, usually the big desktop type things that you've seen in pictures if you don't remember them. But they were clunky. They usually had one or two floppy disk drives, maybe a hard disk, and they ran DOS. One process, one app, one process at a time. Kind of limited. And the worst thing is the graphics were very limited. The big word processor at the time was one called WordPerfect, and it got shuffled around a little bit. WordPerfect Corporation sold it to Corel, and believe it or not, they still sell WordPerfect for Windows today. Not terribly popular, but it does still exist. But the big version of WordPerfect, the most popular one, was called WordPerfect version 5.1, and in the mid-80s, virtually every office in the world had at least one computer running this thing. It was very complicated. You would usually send someone out to learn it in a class because the manuals were difficult to understand. Big fat manuals, thick things. And of course, there was no graphics, so there was no point and click. If you wanted to insert a picture, you'd have to use some sort of weird little command code or markup code in there. It was really bad. Changing fonts, you usually only had one font on your screen, whatever the font DOS used. And if you wanted to change to an italic font or, some sort of fancy font, you had to type in a code for that too. And it got very complicated and tedious to keep track of this stuff. So usually just one or two people, secretaries, would get really good with this stuff. It wasn't that hard just to type in a thing. I used it back in the day a little bit, but at no point would I say I ever really understood all of it. There was a lot to WordPerfect. Hard to use, but very popular because it was very powerful. Around the same time, there was shareware. Open source was not a big thing at that point. There was no internet to be used by most people, so developers couldn't communicate as well as they do now. So most developers were just single people or pairs of people working in their bedroom, in their garage, making some kind of good software that they would give away and hope people sent them money for it. And the big word processor at the time in the shareware field was one called PC Write. It was very similar to WordPerfect, had a lot of the same features, but the benefit of PC Write is it was free. WordPerfect cost several $100s. It was considered commercial office software. PC Write was the same thing for people on more of a budget. They hoped you would send them money, but if you didn't, it still worked. Another big one at the time was WordStar. This one, it was powerful, it was good, but it was really, really hard as far as I can remember. I played with it for a while and I could never get it to do much. You can see just from the screenshot here, there's control keys to move the cursor, Control W, Control Z. Not every keyboard even had arrow keys back then. So it was weird. It was a complicated mess, I thought, but it's there. The thing about WordStar is there are still people today that use that very version of WordStar. George R.R. Martin is very famously known for still using I keep calling it WordPerfect. It's WordStar 4 point something. This was from 1980s, from the 1980s. He typed in those huge, long Game of Thrones books in that. It's what he knows. He doesn't have to think about learning something new. He's an old guy who's rich. He can do what he wants. Nobody's going to complain if he just get that next book out. But he still uses it, and that's the point of this. The problem is, what he's using is from 1980s. I assume he's got a really old machine to go with it. What happens if something breaks down? Why couldn't they make something like WordStar or WordPerfect that runs on today's hardware? That way you could have a nice, reliable text-based word processor that ran on your latest machine. Now, granted, you don't need an i7 with 16 gigabytes of RAM for the stuff that we do in text mode, but It's nice. You've got that machine, you may as well use it. And there is one. It's called Wordgrinder. Wordgrinder is open sourced. It's text-based. It'll run on your Mac, PC, Linux, most of the same things that'll run command line apps. And it's modern. They still put out releases today. It's still in development. They've put out bug fixes. It's really nice. And it's very simple to learn. Now keep in mind, there's a difference between a word processor and a text editor. Text editors just work on text files. You can get very complicated with them, but it's still basically text. Things like Nano and Vim and Emacs are text editors, and we will get into those probably pretty heavily in future videos. But word processors are designed to get things out on the printed page. They do things like bold and italic, and many times you can put in pictures and stuff like that, some basic formatting stuff. That's what a word processor is for. Word processors, the goal is paper. Text editors, the goal is text files without the pictures. So let's take a look at Wordgrinder and see how this thing works. Here we go. Okay, so Wordgrinder. We've got the website for cowlark.com on screen here, and you can see they're still doing bug fixes as recently as November, so it's up to date. And what is it? Wordgrinder is a Unicode-aware character cell word processor that runs in a terminal or a Windows console. It's designed to get the hell out of your way and let you get some work done. There are screenshots. You can see it can be done in Windows or however you like to do it. Lots of good features here. Open source, how to get it for Windows, how to get it for Mac, and all that good stuff. Okay, so there you go. That's our website, cowlark.com, and that's all we're going to do with that. So how do we get it going? Well, you just type from the command line, Wordgrinder. And it'll tell you there's no such thing. Okay, we have to install it. And just like last time, sudo apt install Wordgrinder. Okay, now clear the screen, and to get it going, like I said, once it's installed, you just type Wordgrinder, and you get this screen right here. And that funky looking thing in the middle is the top and the bottom of your document. So okay, so I can type stuff there in the middle. It shows up in the middle. And as you type, things start moving up the screen and the screen fills up. Okay, and you see there's a status bar down at the bottom. Unnamed, changed, 33 words, and page 1 of 1. And there's no commands up at the top of the screen. There's no on-screen controls. The mouse doesn't do much. To get to the menus, you hit the escape key. Only the escape key does it. The function keys don't do anything. It just escape. And you get the main menu. And there's file, edit, style, documents, and navigation there. Let's go with the first one. And this is the big one for loading and saving. You can create a new document, load a document, save as, just like anything else. If I want to save this thing that I just made, I can save this as test document. Boom, it's saved. Go back to the menu, escape, file. And you can add a new blank document. You can import documents. Let's say I've got a document already made in some other application. I can import ODT files, which is LibreOffice, HTML files, and text files. Well, I got a text file here, tales-to-make-you-shiver.txt. I'll load that in. This is a longer one. This is actually a full-length book. But as you can see, I can scroll through it. This just uses the up and down keys, just like you'd expect. And here's a story. And if you want to change things, you can. If you want to change it to Markdown or something, you can use Markdown tags. But what Wordgrinder is really good at is down here under the styles. See, it's not just a text editor. If it were a text editor, this was written in a text editor, which is why all you see is text. If I want to add styles, that's what a word processor is good for. And I can make words italic and bold and underlined, but I can also change the paragraph styles. So I've got, where am I anyway? Okay, when the clown comes calling, I want to change that to a heading, an H1 level, a main heading level, because this would be the start of a chapter. Go to the change paragraph style, and you've got some choices here, pre-formatted, H1, H2. If you're familiar with Markdown, these are the same as the Markdown codes. And when I change this to an H1, heading 1, it changes the font. It's now bright white and underlined. What else does it do? What else does it do? Okay, you can import documents. You can export documents as ODT, HTML, Markdown. You can import and export as plain text, LaTeX, TROF, a lot of different things there. Manage documents lets you organize the open documents that are open already. Settings, not a lot of settings on these. You can set it to autosave. You can do various things. You can decide which spell checker you want to use. Use a system dictionary or something else. About Wordgrinder, tell you the version and things. Okay, file format version 7, yada yada. Okay, moving down to the edit menu. Cut and paste works just fine. Cut, copy, paste, delete, undo, and redo. It's got a whole bunch of levels of undo. You can find and replace words. You can use the smart quotes, which are the curly quotes when it prints, or you can use the straight quotes that text use. You can use your spell checker. I don't know if I've got a spell checker set up in here. I do not. Okay. So one thing I could do is set up which spell checker I want to use. Load new system dictionary. I can use iSpell or some other things. Let's see if I can find a misspelled word somewhere. Not that way. Edit. Again, this is a finished book. It probably doesn't have a lot of misspelled words, so maybe it doesn't. Style, you can set things to italic. Let's see, you can highlight a word. And if you don't want to deal with those menus, you can just hit Control-I for italic, Control-B for bold. Those are kind of standardized with Windows or anything else. So you can boldify and italify those kind of things. If you don't like it, you can set them back to plain. You can change the margins. One thing I don't like is every time I want to get out of one of those menus, I hit escape. I have to go all the way through them again. I can't just back out. It slows things down a little bit. And the status bar, that little green bar down at the bottom, can turn that off. And suddenly it's much more full screen. Distraction-free typing. There you go. No status bar at all. I like the status bar, so I'll turn it back on. Again, I'm going through all these menus with the arrow keys and the highlighting so you can see what I'm doing. You can also use just the keyboard. Like for style there, I can hit S. To change something bold, I can hit B. It's much faster. But you can't see what I'm doing, so I'm using the arrows. Documents. If I have two documents at once, there's that one I typed in. And here's the one that I loaded. They're both in memory at the same time, like something like Vim or Emacs buffers. Navigation. If you don't know what you're doing with movement, you've got a long list of things you can go through. Shift right goes to the next word, for example. Shift right. Well, not with this terminal, it doesn't. Okay. So your mileage may vary on what works there. So if you want to get out, you can save a document. Save document as, well, whatever. You change the words there. File and exit. It'll probably tell me I have unsaved. No, it didn't. Okay. One thing that is interesting about Wordgrinder is it uses its own weird little format. As you can see here, I got the Tales to Make You Shiver.txt. I had that when I started. I copied it from somewhere else. That's just a standard text file. But then I started messing around with it. The one that I typed and saved at one point was testdocument.wg. And then that one with Tales to Make You Shiver that I never renamed is just called .wg, which is not the best way to go probably. Wordgrinder.wg. See if this even works. It did. Okay, I didn't lose it. Would have been better to have saved it with a file name. Still though, what it does do, it saves it in its own format. Well, as you can see with this screen right here, when the clown comes calling and Marcy and Beth have saved their formatting. When the clown comes calling is still heading 1, Marcy's italic, Beth is bold. So it saved those. That's a good thing. The bad thing, you sure you want to discard them without saving? Yes. The bad thing is this WG format is not straight text. So if I want to look at this thing, cat WG, this will type the contents of that file to the screen. Okay, that's not terrible, but it's not perfect plain text either. You can see the text there. It all starts out with, well, whatever. Looks like a lot of P's. But it's not a plain text file anymore. It does use its own little formatting. Okay, so here's that test document. It was just one line of stuff. You can see the one line of stuff there at the bottom of the screen, but it also saved all this style information, which that's not bad. That you probably want that in a word processor. Just keep in mind though, once you save something in WG format, it's not text anymore. And that's pretty much it. You can change different settings, change the look and feel. You can change to a widescreen mode or change the maximum width. Nothing loaded, so you can't really see that. But you can do some customizations with it. The terminator is above and below document. That's those two little lines that appear with an empty document. Overall, it's kind of neat. It's a very clean looking word processor. It's all text. You can customize it a little bit, but not a whole lot. And that's it. It basically, if you want to type in a story or a report or a document, type it, save it, print it, use your bold, underline, and basic formats, and it all just works. It's much simpler to learn than something like Vim or Emacs, and yet it's got a lot more power than something very basic like Nano. It's there, it's free, it's Wordgrinder. Give it a shot. Next week, we're going to go back to something fun again. I've got a game lined up for us, which I think you'll like, because games in text mode, a lot of them aren't very good. This one is really, really good. You'll like it. Of course, if you can't wait for next week, pick up Going Text, available where all books are sold. Otherwise, I'll see you next week. See ya.